The scent of 1,000 white lilies was beginning to feel like a threat. It clung to the heavy air of the old church, thick and cloying, a sweet perfume on the edge of decay. Eleanor stood at the altar, the weight of her satin gown a solid presence around her, its structure a corset of expectation. The organ music swelled, a tide meant to carry her into a new life, a secure life, a life as Mrs. Richard Sterling. This was the moment she had planned for a year. It was perfect. However, perfection was a fragile thing. Her best friend, Chloe, slipped beside her, her bridesmaid dress a whisper of lilac silk. She did not offer a smile or a last-minute adjustment to Eleanor's veil. Instead, she pressed a cold phone into Eleanor's hand. The video on the screen was grainy, shot in the dim light of a hotel bar. There was Richard, her fiancé, his perfectly tailored suit jacket slung over a chair. He was laughing, leaning in to kiss a woman whose slender frame was poured into a sliver of a dress. The timestamp in the corner was a brutal digital fact. Last night, the kiss was not a friendly peck. It was a deep, lingering promise of something else entirely. The world Eleanor thought she was in, a world of love and partnership and carefully negotiated futures, dissolved. In its place was the raw, undeniable truth of betrayal. She was standing in a room full of people, a spectacle in white, a fool, and now she could not leave. Eleanor lifted her head, her gaze finding Richard at the other end of the altar. He smiled, a practiced, easy smile that had charmed boardrooms and investors. It had charmed her. Now it looked like a mask. She walked toward him, the heavy train of her dress whispering over the cold stone floor. The priest faltered. The music quieted. A nervous ripple went through the pews. She stopped directly in front of him, holding the phone up so only he could see the screen. His smile froze, then shattered. A flicker of panic entered his eyes, quickly replaced by annoyance. "Eleanor, don't," he hissed, his voice a low, urgent command. "Not here." "Where then, Richard?" she asked, her own voice surprisingly steady. It did not feel like her own. It felt like it belonged to a woman carved from ice. "At the reception after I've vowed to honor you? In our honeymoon suite, after I've promised to cherish you." The guests were murmuring now, their polite curiosity turning into rapt attention. This was better than a wedding. This was a drama. "It was nothing," he insisted, reaching for her arm. "A mistake. It meant nothing." Eleanor pulled back from his touch as if burned. "It meant you made a vow to someone else before you even made one to me. It meant you think I'm stupid. It meant this," she gestured to the flowers, "the guests, the whole expensive charade, is a lie." She turned to face the crowd, her voice ringing out in the sudden, absolute silence of the church. "The wedding is off." Collective gasp. Richard's face went from pale to crimson. "Eleanor, you're being hysterical. Think about our families. Think about the embarrassment." "I'm thinking about the woman you spent last night with," she shot back. "Was she embarrassing you? Or did you just prefer her because there's less of her to be embarrassed by?" The cruel words were out before she could stop them. A lifetime of small slights and backhanded compliments about her body finally finding a voice. Richard flinched. He had no answer for that. She was about to turn, to walk down that aisle alone and leave this ruin behind her. But a voice, deep and calm and carrying an authority that silenced every other whisper in the room, cut through the tension. "The bride is correct. The man is not worthy of the sacrament." Eleanor's head snapped toward the sound. In the front pew, a man she vaguely recognized sat with an unnerving stillness. Dante Moretti. He was a business associate of her father's, a man who dealt in imports and logistics and moved with the quiet danger of a predator. He was dressed in a suit so exquisitely tailored it seemed a part of him, the dark wool absorbing the light. His eyes, the color of black coffee, were fixed on her. He did not look at Richard. He did not look at anyone else. "A wedding was paid for," Dante continued, his voice even, yet it filled the entire nave. "A contract was made. It would be a shame to waste the venue." Richard finally found his voice, sputtering with indignation. "Who the hell do you think you are? This is a private matter." Dante's gaze did not waver from Eleanor. He rose slowly to his feet. He was taller than she had realized, his presence commanding the space around him. He moved like the room owed him passage. "I am a man who understands contracts, and a man who believes a beautiful bride should not be left standing at the altar." He took a step into the aisle. "He has broken his vow. Perhaps she would consider a different 1 inch." The implication hung in the air, audacious and impossible. The entire church was frozen, waiting. Eleanor looked from Richard's stunned, furious face to Dante Moretti's calm, inscrutable one. She knew who Dante was. Her father had warned her about him in hushed tones. A man of old-world principles and new-world ruthlessness. A man you did not cross. A man who collected debts. She should have been terrified. She should have run. Instead, a wild, reckless fire ignited in the frozen landscape of her heart. She was a spectacle, a joke. The fat girl left at the altar. Richard had made his choice. Now she would make hers. She looked directly at Dante Moretti, a complete stranger, a dangerous man whose world was made of shadows and whispers. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and ringing. "I would." The church did not gasp. It exploded. Richard stared at her as if she had just confessed to a murder. Her parents were on their feet, their faces a mask of horror. But Eleanor only saw Dante. A slow, almost imperceptible nod was his only reaction. He walked up the aisle, his steps measured and certain, and stopped beside her. He did not offer his arm. He simply stood at her side, a bulwark of dark wool and unshakable confidence. He looked at the priest, whose mouth was hanging open. "Finish it," Dante commanded. The world outside the church doors ceased to exist. Two of Dante's men who had been sitting silently in the back pews, materialized and escorted her away from the ensuing chaos. They did not touch her, but their presence was a wall, parting the sea of shocked guests and fuming family members. She could hear Richard shouting her name, his voice a mixture of rage and disbelief. It sounded very far away. She was guided into the back of a black sedan with windows so dark they drank the afternoon light. The door closed with a heavy, final thud, sealing her inside with Dante. The silence in the car was more profound than the noise in the church. He did not speak. He simply sat beside her, his large frame taking up space. His scent a clean, sharp mix of sandalwood and something else, something metallic and cold. Her wedding dress felt absurd now, a child's costume for a play that had ended badly. The satin was stiff, the beading heavy. She felt trapped inside it. They drove through the city, but she could not have said where they were going. The streets were a blur of motion and color. Her mind was a maelstrom of shock, regret, and a terrifying, exhilarating sense of freedom. She had detonated her own life. The car descended into an underground garage and stopped. Dante finally turned to her. His dark eyes assessed her, not with pity or triumph, but with a quiet, unnerving intensity, as if he were examining a newly acquired, very complicated piece of art. "My men will arrange for your things to be collected from your former apartment," he said. His voice was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate in her bones. "You will stay with me." It was not a request. It was a statement of fact. They rode an elevator in silence, directly up to a penthouse that seemed to float above the city. The doors opened into a sprawling space of glass, steel, and polished marble. It was beautiful, minimalist, and as cold as a mausoleum. There were no family photos on the walls, no clutter on the tables. It was a space designed for a man who did not expect to be known. One of his men, a stone-faced giant named Luca, brought her a glass of water. She took it, her hand shaking slightly. "I need to call my parents," she said, the first words she had spoken since the church. "That would be unwise," Dante said, walking over to the vast window that overlooked the city. "They are with him. They will try to reason with you." "There is nothing to reason about. A deal was made." "That wasn't a deal," she retorted, a spark of her earlier fire returning. That was insanity. I don't even know you. He turned from the window. You know I am not him. For today, that is enough, he gestured to a hallway. There is a room for you. Rest. We will speak later. She did not want to rest. She wanted to scream. But she was exhausted, the adrenaline of the day draining out of her, leaving a hollow ache in its place. She walked down the hall and into a bedroom that was larger than her entire old apartment. It was as impersonal as the rest of the penthouse, but the bed was enormous and looked impossibly soft. She peeled off the wedding dress, letting the mountain of satin and lace pool on the floor like a dead thing. She felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in her throat. She had traded one cage for another, except this one was bigger, more luxurious, and infinitely more dangerous. Later, she found him in his study. It was the only room in the house that felt lived in. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. A massive oak desk dominated the center of the room. He was on the phone, speaking in a low, rapid voice. The words were English, but the subject was clearly business. Words like shipment, territory, and consequence were spoken with a finality that left no room for negotiation. He was not just a businessman. He was a king ruling a hidden kingdom, and his words were law. Her eyes drifted across his desk. Amidst the neat stacks of paper and a heavy crystal ashtray, there was a single silver-framed photograph. It was an old, black and white picture of a young woman with Dante's dark eyes and a fierce, proud smile. She looked like she was laughing in the face of a storm. There was a scar cutting through her left eyebrow, identical to one Dante had, barely visible beside his own. A sister, perhaps. He hung up the phone and his gaze followed hers to the photograph. The professional coldness in his expression fractured, replaced by something ancient and wounded. It was there and gone in a second, his face becoming a mask of stone once more. "My sister Sophia," he said, his voice flat. He did not elaborate. He did not need to. The way he said her name was a eulogy. It spoke of a failure, a loss he carried like a phantom limb. He had failed to protect her. Eleanor said nothing, merely nodding. She understood loss. She had just lost the future she thought she had. It was a smaller, pettier loss, but the shape of the void was the same. She wandered back to the main living area, to the wall of glass that looked out over the city lights. They glittered like a carpet of scattered diamonds, cold and distant. She felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. She stood there for a long time, watching the traffic flow like blood through the city's arteries. She did not hear Dante approach. He was silent, his movements economical and precise. He did not touch her. He simply placed a small table beside her. On it was a glass of water and a plate with bread, cheese, and olives. Simple, real food. "You have not eaten," he said. It was not a question. She looked at the plate. It was the first act of simple human kindness she had received all day. It was not gentle or tender. It was a practical gesture, a recognition of a need. But it was something. She picked up a piece of bread, her appetite slowly, tentatively returning. Her decision in the church had been an act of chaotic self-preservation. Therefore, she was now here, in this man's home, under his protection. She had to learn the rules of this new world. And she had to learn them fast, because survival here would be far more complicated than simply saying, "I do." The days that followed were a study in quiet observation. Dante gave her the run of the penthouse, a gilded cage with a breathtaking view. He was often gone, disappearing for hours or days at a time into the city's shadowed corners where his real business was conducted. Eleanor spent the time exploring her new reality. She read the books in his library, classics and histories and military strategy. She learned he was a man who valued knowledge as much as power. One afternoon, while he was out, her curiosity led her to a panel in the library wall that did not quite sit flush. Behind it was a safe, a black metal square set into the concrete. It was formidable, impregnable. She had no idea what it contained, but she knew it was the heart of his kingdom. Later that week, she overheard him on a phone call. His voice was low and tight with a controlled anger she had not heard before. He spoke of a man named Marco Vettori, a rival who was getting bold. "He wants the ledger," Dante had said. "He thinks it will cripple us." Eleanor's blood ran cold. A ledger. The kind of thing that could send a man like Dante away for a lifetime or get him killed. The safe in the wall suddenly felt like a ticking bomb. The next day, a package arrived. It was a long, white box, delivered by a courier who did not meet her eyes. Luca intercepted it, but Dante insisted she be the one to open it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black tissue paper, was a single white lily, identical to the ones from her wedding bouquet. Except this one was beginning to brown at the edges. Its stem deliberately snapped. It was a message. Vettori knew about her. The bride from the church. The spectacle. She was no longer just an asset. She was a target. Dante's jaw tightened as he looked at the dead flower. He took it from the box and dropped it into the waste bin as if it were poison. "He will not touch you," he said, the words a vow made of iron. That night, Dante had a meeting, one he said he could not miss. He left her with Luca and 2 other guards, but the vast penthouse felt empty and vulnerable. Eleanor was reading in the library when the first subtle sound reached her, a faint scrape from the terrace. Then the power cut out, plunging the penthouse into an emergency-lit gloom. The alarms shrieked to life. Luca was instantly at her side, gun drawn, pushing her toward the master bedroom. "Stay here. Do not open the door for anyone but me." She could hear shouts, the sound of breaking glass, the sickening thud of bodies hitting walls. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was real. The violence she had only read about was now inside her home. Trapped in the dark, she thought she was going to die. But then, a detail from Dante's earlier phone call surfaced in her mind. He had been complaining about Vettori's lack of imagination. "He always comes from the west," Dante had said. "He thinks the wind exposure on that terrace is our only weak spot." The master bedroom was on the east side, but next to it was a small service room for the building's HVAC system. Its door usually kept locked. She remembered seeing a heavy steel bolt on the inside. An idea, desperate and dangerous, took root. She slipped out of the bedroom, moving silently through the darkened hall while Luca and the other guard were engaged at the front of the apartment. She found the service room, unlocked it from the hallway with the key that was always left on the lintel, and propped the heavy door open just a crack. Then she went to the kitchen, grabbed the heaviest skillet she could find, and went back to the living room. She could hear one of Vettori's men moving down the hall toward her. He was being cautious, but he was coming. Taking a deep breath, she hurled the skillet against the far wall of the west-facing terrace, creating a loud clatter. The intruder took the bait. He changed direction, moving toward the sound, toward the terrace, which meant he had to pass the open door to the service room. As he crept past, she slammed the heavy door shut and threw the bolt. The man roared with fury, trapped inside the small, windowless room. The diversion bought the time Luca needed. The immediate threat was neutralized. When the main power was restored, the apartment was a wreck. But they were alive. Dante returned an hour later. He moved through the scene of destruction, his face a cold, unreadable mask. He listened to Luca's report, his eyes scanning every detail. He expected to find Eleanor hysterical, a liability cowering in a corner. Instead, he found her sitting in a chair in the library, a book open on her lap, her hands perfectly steady. He dismissed Luca and stood before her, the silence in the room heavy with unspoken things. "You should have hidden," he said, his voice rougher than she had ever heard it. "There was nowhere to hide," she replied, looking up at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "So I made a choice." He studied her face, seeing not the humiliated bride from the church, but a woman of unexpected steel. He saw a queen in the making. He crossed the room in 2 strides. His hand came up, not to strike or to soothe, but to simply rest on her arm. The touch was a shock, a brand of heat against her skin. It was possessive. It was a claim. "You are mine to protect," he said, and it was not a promise. It was a law of nature. Her bravery had earned his respect, but it had also painted a bright, unmissable target on her back. Vettori would no longer see her as a pawn to be used against Dante. He would see her as a player to be removed from the board. The attack on the penthouse enraged Vettori. He had been made to look foolish, outmaneuvered by a woman who should have been nothing more than collateral. His next move was more insidious. He delved into Eleanor's past, into the life she had left behind at the altar. He found her weakness, her loyalty to the people she had once loved. A message came, not to the penthouse, but to a burner phone one of Dante's men had given her for emergencies. It was a text, seemingly from her friend Chloe. "I'm in trouble. Richard is losing it. He's talking crazy. Meet me at the gallery. Please, Elle."
"I'm scared."
Eleanor's blood ran cold. It was a trap. Chloe would never contact her this way. Richard, for all his faults, was a coward, not a physical threat. This had Vettori's fingerprints all over it. He was using her old life as bait, counting on her to be sentimental, predictable. He was underestimating her again. She could have told Dante. She could have let his men handle it. That would have been the safe, sensible thing to do. But something had shifted in her since the night of the invasion. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was a participant. This was her fight, too. Vettori had made it personal. Instead of showing the message to Dante, she wrote him a note. "Vettori is at the Met, the Egyptian wing. He thinks I'm coming alone. He's wrong." She left it on his desk, next to the picture of his sister. Then she walked out of the penthouse, telling the guard at the door she was going for a walk, a privilege Dante had recently, and reluctantly, granted her. She was not a damsel to be rescued. She was the bait in her own trap. She knew the Metropolitan Museum of Art like the back of her hand. She had spent countless hours there as a student, finding solace in its quiet, cavernous halls. She knew its rhythms, its blind spots, its escape routes. She walked into the grand entrance hall, her heart a steady, determined drum against her ribs. She saw Vettori's men immediately. They were trying to be subtle, but in their expensive, ill-fitting suits, they stood out like crows in a flock of doves. She led them on a chase, moving from the crowded Impressionist galleries to the more secluded medieval section. She let them get close, then slipped away through a service corridor she knew was often left unlocked. Her goal was the Temple of Dender, a massive, open space with limited exits. Perfect choke point. She walked into the vast room, the ancient temple rising before her, surrounded by a reflecting pool. Vettori was waiting for her, standing by the water's edge, a smug smile on his face. "I knew you would come," he said, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Women are so predictable. Some of us more than others," Eleanor said, her eyes darting around the room, marking the positions of his men. Two by the entrance, one near the far wall. "Your new husband," Vettori sneered, taking a step toward her. "He hides behind his walls, his men, but he could not protect you. He sends his wife to do his fighting." "No." A voice cut through the air, cold and lethal. "Dante." He emerged from the shadows behind the temple, Luca and two other men fanning out behind him. They moved with a silent, deadly grace. Vettori's men had been so focused on Eleanor, they had never seen them coming. She came to do her own. The room erupted into chaos. It was not the wild, messy violence of movies. It was brutal, efficient, and horrifyingly quiet. Dante moved through it all like a choreographer of death. Vettori, seeing his plan crumble, lunged for Eleanor. He saw her as the weak link, the easy prize. She did not scream. She did not cower. As he reached for her, she sidestepped and kicked out, not at him, but at the base of a heavy bronze stanchion holding a velvet rope. The weighted metal base swung out, catching Vettori behind the knees. He stumbled, his arms windmilling, his triumphant sneer turning into a mask of shock. That half-second of imbalance was all Dante needed. He was on Vettori in an instant, and the threat was ended. Permanently. The aftermath was silent. The tourists had fled. It was just them, standing in the shadow of an ancient temple, the air thick with the metallic tang of blood. The clean, predictable world Eleanor had once known was gone. She had seen the truth of Dante's life, and she had discovered a capacity for cold calculation within herself she never knew existed. The cost of her survival was her innocence. There was no going back. Back in the penthouse, the silence stretched between them, thick with the unsaid. The city lights glittered below, oblivious. Dante stood before her, the mask of the unfeeling dawn stripped away. In its place was a man, raw and exposed. "He targeted you because of me," Dante said, his voice rough. "He underestimated you because of me." He reached out, his hand gentle, and took hers. He touched the simple gold band that now graced her finger, a ring they had acquired in a sterile city hall office days after the disastrous wedding. "This was a contract," he said, his thumb stroking her skin. "A convenience to save your honor and solve a problem for me." It is no longer. He met her eyes, and for the first time, she saw past the power and the danger, into the man who mourned a sister he could not save. He did not say he loved her. The words would have been too small, too simple for the complex, dangerous thing that had grown between them. He said something more honest. "In my world, loyalty is the only currency. You have shown me more than any man who wears my name. You are not under my protection, Eleanor. You are my partner." Eleanor did not answer with words. She stepped into his space, closing the final gap between them. She reached up and smoothed the collar of his shirt, a small, intimate gesture of possession, of belonging. He had not chosen her as a bride. She had chosen him as her king. Looking out at the sprawling city below, a kingdom of shadows and light, she felt no fear. She felt like she was finally home.